Hi, my name's Joshua Freitas with Nine Talks, and today I have a special guest that I've known for years, and many people in the industry do know him. He's always out and about. I love following him on social media. So today I have Matt joining me. And Matt, would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Of course. Well, Dr. Josh, you're like one of the first people I feel like I met in the industry, and you just opened your arms to me. So, first off, just so grateful for you. Yeah, my background. So, I've helped start two companies that have both led to acquisitions. The first ever company was a silent disco company, helping people throw silent discos around the country, which, could be its own episode by itself. But that kind of really adjusted to develop a wireless headphone system designed for the group setting for senior living programming, right? Everyone's hearing was all over the place. And that's where we first met, and you were our first ever case study. So thank you for that. And that really evolved to growing that and helping so many people around the country. We grew that to about 1,500 senior living communities, which led to another acquisition by a company called Uniguest. And from there, worked for them for a little bit, but then found another calling to really just try and change the technology culture. And that's what led me to join a company called Parasol Alliance and join our founder and CEO, Amber Barden, on our mission to really just, again, change what that culture can look like with technology and where it wants to go and how that can help as we move forward along this journey we call life.
What do you see some of the biggest obstacles in tech? I see a lot of people that you have like old school senior living and new school senior living, and people are sometimes scared of it and some people are embracing it. Kind of where do you feel like those cards or decks will fall?
Yeah, it's a great question. And from what I've seen in terms of some of the big obstacles, so I think you call one of them out, right? Like, I think a lot of the times a technology culture needs to be led from the top down, but there's still some of these CEOs we see at these organizations that are still pen and paper. And, if they're not embracing technology, no one else will. So we've got that on one side of the spectrum. I also think, too, there's all these different generations working in these communities, and some are more familiar and have a higher tech appetite. I also think as we're, trying to educate and really think about technology in senior living, we need to make it simple, right? Simple for the end user, simple for the way that we're doing it. And I think too many companies are trying to get in, and it might seem simple to them, but if you're trying to change patterns for that, front care worker or that frontline care worker and how they're using technology, and they haven't used it like that in 30 years, like, how are you really changing that? I also think for technology, another big hurdle that's not talked about enough or maybe talked about too much, a lot of these communities don't have end-to-end enterprise level Wi-Fi. So if you're trying to embrace technology and be innovative, we continue to hear horror stories of communities, investing $300,000 in a fall detection system only to learn that their Wi-Fi and infrastructure can't support it. And so there's things they need to go back and fix before they can be innovative and really try to embrace some of this other forward-thinking technology.
So, would you say that it would be important for people to invest in a really strong, robust Wi-Fi so that they could grow through? Because I see a lot of people building is slowed down, but I see a lot of going in and refabbing senior living. So you're saying Wi-Fi is a really important or crucial part of that, then essentially to be able to kind of carry over the next few years.
Absolutely. So if you think about it like this, right? Like, you've got so many systems that are trying to get on the network today, maybe a few hundred, maybe in the early, small thousands, right? Like, every device is trying to get on this. This number is only going to jump by 3, 4x, right? More and more residents are going to be coming in wanting to get on this network. If you're looking at some of these technology pieces, they're all going to try and get some sort of Wi-Fi signal, and everything is fighting for some of this bandwidth. It's just going to slow everything down or essentially not make things usable. And you hear that people promote their Wi-Fi. It might be great in the common room, but in the residence rooms, it's not there. And as we think about the Internet of Things, right, in order for these different devices to talk to each other, they're going to need some bandwidth that they need to lean on. And so I do see that as definitely a top of mind for a lot of people to want to get, especially in some of these new builds. But then to your point about the refurb, prioritizing that, because if the Wi-Fi is down, you're definitely going to hear it, and it's just going to get louder and louder as we move down this journey. And some of these people, the residents that are moving in that are more used to using technology, aren't getting access to that.
You're making me feel old because you use such cool terms like tech. I don't know if it was tech culture you used or tech landscape, but what is the coolest tech that you see out there right now that's kind of emerging into senior living?
Yeah, so I think it's the most buzziest of buzzwords, but AI, I think, has an opportunity to really revolutionize not only senior living, but just work as we know it. I always like to go back to the saying of, and like a lot of people are scared of the AI, right? Of the humanoid robots coming in and taking over our jobs. I will knock on wood as I say that, but I always like to go back to the saying of automating the mundane to elevating the meaningful. And when I look at some of the mundane of the stuff we need to deal with, right? It's like that administrative, some of the paperwork stuff that we need to focus on. That, don't get me wrong, it is important, but how are we really just cutting down the amount of time that we're taking to do some of those things to really help maximize the meaningful? And when I think of meaningful, especially in this industry, it's those one-on-one interactions, it's developing those relationships, it's really getting to know the residents for who they are versus like cutting out some of that background you know fires that we all have to deal with on a daily basis. So if we can use AI to do a lot of that stuff, and I think every vendor company out there is saying that they use AI, I think there's a wide spectrum of people that are doing it the right way versus just kind of using it as a marketing tactic. But I think AI has got a really cool opportunities and kind of built into that, right? It's just like the data analytics and how can we start to identify trends and look at some of these different things. And I think it really has a really cool opportunity to do that. And depending on the person's role, right? Like I just had to present to EDs the other day of how they can use it, talking to sales and marketing directors next week on how they can use it. So it's a kind of a wide spectrum based on that role. But I do think too, when you're thinking about AI, especially in this industry, I think of it in one of two buckets. So one is like, how do I become the best version of myself and just become like, not, I would say fully optimized, but like even how I use AI in my day to day, I'm cutting out like 20 hours a week just on, again, like meeting notes, some of the thought generation, PowerPoints. So there's that one thing that I think has got much more short term opportunities. And then there's this more mid to long term, which is more of like the team component of AI, which I think will have, you're starting to see some people really starting to embrace it. But to our earlier points of like the technology appetite and what adoption and stickiness looks like, I do think there's some uphill battles that we all need to kind of, that we'll all figure out and hopefully figure out and kind of continue on as we move forward.
I love that. And I definitely see you as a thought leader in the whole tech space. Where would you suggest for people to start? Like, where is something to, if you were to consult with a company and say, hey, you need to embrace technology, maybe what are one or two places you feel like they should start to embrace that technology?
So I think a great place to start is kind of getting a snapshot of where they are today, right? So thinking from a senior living provider standpoint, there's something that we do, and there's other companies out there that do it too, but we call it our tech assessment and strategic roadmap. Where the best way I could kind of compare it is to like, you just bought a house and you're getting it inspected, right? You've got a professional that comes in that knows way more than you, is kind of going through everything and anything and identifying some of the points, and then the points of concern, points of opportunity, and then really just basically laying out where are some of those risks today, right? And where are some of those opportunities, and then kind of flagging those and putting together a 3-year technology roadmap and embracing technology that way. I think too many times senior living companies and providers are going to these conferences, talking to charismatic sales reps, right? That are like basically telling them they should embrace this product, but there's some more of like the foundational stuff that people need to embrace first before they can do that. And it's interesting, like coming from the tech vendor, so many times I would talk to people that I knew who had their roadmap established and could identify their priorities that would then be proactive and find technology vendors to help fill that void versus some people that were just kind of piecemealing it together. So I think first, right, is identifying what's there today, what's working, what's not working through going in IT closets, doing a bunch of staff and resident interviews, and then being forward thinking and establishing that roadmap based on priority.
I love that. And one thing I'll probably shoot myself in the foot for saying, but I feel like our industry lags behind a lot of other industries when it comes to adopting things. And I feel like now every conference I go to is tech, 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 tech. Do you think that we're starting to bridge the gap of bringing technology and being more competitive with other industries too to leverage technology? Or do you still think it's a very small baby field that we're just starting to learn?
I think we are definitely a laggard when it comes to technology adoption. I would probably even put us around like 5 to 10 years behind some of the other industries. I do think 2020 and COVID was basically the kick in the butt that we needed to get us to embrace technology at a different level. I do think it's slowed down a little bit in terms of like the adoption and what that can look like, just because people are, trying to maximize their NOIs and like requiring technology will do this. I do think it's getting better, but I think the biggest problem that providers are experiencing today is too many of these technology vendors are operating in silos, and they need to get things to integrate to basically make life easier for the people working in these communities and at these home offices to maximize what that can look like. But I go back to like a presentation I gave a couple of months ago where someone said they had 16 apps on their phone and none of it all required to do her job and none of them talk to one another. So it's like, how can we really get tech vendors to play nicer in the sandbox with one another, look to embrace these integrations versus just kind of building in silos? Because, if you're just going to keep building in a silo, it's just going to make life that much more difficult for people that you're trying to help.
Could you walk us through where you think the next 3 years looks like as it relates to tech? And then also, if you had a perfect world, what you would want it to look like in 3 years? So, kind of like a double question, but where you think we'll be and where you wish we could be.
Yeah, so I think where we will be in the next 3 years. I think providers are finally understanding that technology adoption, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when, right? So when people are kind of getting on that technology discovery on their own thing, I do think we're still kind of lagging behind. Like I just talked to someone, a CEO of a community group last week who's still on pen and paper, doesn't really want to move, but is finally understanding that they need to make a change. So when I look over the next 3 years, I do think we're going to be seeing AI playing a more significant roles in our day-to-day lives and what that looks like from a workplace functionality improvement. I do think jobs are going to change. New jobs are going to be created when I look at those 3 years. And not a surprise to anybody, there's going to continue to be this caregiver shortage. And I do think technology isn't the magic bullet for all of that, but I do think it's one of those things that can help with a lot of that stuff, and really helping with some of those frontline care workers and what that can be. So in the next 3 years, I do think you're going to see more and more of these bigger companies basically finally reading this demographic shift and trying to create products and looking at senior living and the B2B as an easy play for them to, maximize shareholder value. But I do think it's going to be more difficult than people realize. And I do think pilots are going to be slow to get embraced. They've always been slow to be embraced because I do think embracing technology requires a certain level of risk tolerance, right? Because you don't want to get something in there and have it fail. And I do think this industry as a whole their risk tolerance isn't as high as probably some of the other industries, right? Because sometimes you're playing with people's lives. There's other things that could come into play with that. So I do think that is top of mind. When I look at like the dystopian perfect way of the next 3 years of where technology can play, I do think like technology can drive a lot of the autonomous BS behind the scenes to really maximize what senior living should be its best part, which is giving care and giving experiences, right? To really help people live the best quality of life that they can in this, third chapter of theirs. And when I look at technology like that, right? Like I do one presentation talking about 2040, so a little bit further than those 3 years, but it's like you wake up to personalized music. You get the daily activities for that day based on your preferences and what you like. You're getting the right medications that are coming in. If you need to check in with some sort of lower level of care staff, you have that opportunity to do that. And I just do think it makes life a little easier. But, I don't know if we're looking at the Jetsons quite yet or a Black Mirror episode, depending on who you ask. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity for that. We'll probably fall closer to the first part of that, but it'll be interesting to see as we continue to develop. I also think just another quick thought for you, Josh, that like senior living communities, it's interesting when I see them try to be tech innovative, but they don't have a CTO or a CIO on their team. They might have somebody that likes technology kind of leading that cause. And I think them will become more professional of how they're approaching technology and embracing technology and really just being intentional with their technology as they move forward.
What does a chief technology officer look like within an organization? I know that you probably work with some organization that might have that role. I don't think it's as common, like you said, in our industry, but what does that look like? What does that role look like within an organization?
Of course, like on the tech vendor side, CTO is kind of in charge of really developing where that product is going. When I look at the CTO of the senior living side, I look at someone that's really, what is the technology vision for that organization looking 5 to 10 years down the line, and then bringing in the right technology vendors to help bring that vision to life, right? They're not technically like developing their own technology internally or doing anything like that, but it's really bringing that vision to life and how technology can help fit those needs. And I do think it requires a level of understanding and a level of just kind of understanding where technology is going versus trying to embrace technology that was considered innovative, a few years ago or whatnot.
What does innovation look like to you?
That is a great question. So I do think innovation doesn't necessarily need to be specific to technology. I really look at innovation as how are we making the current processes, current way that we're doing things better, more efficient, and just like offering that better experience on the other end, right? So like there's simple things that could be considered, some might not consider innovative, but like I even just look at innovation as like how do we take current ways and just make those better. And there's a few ways that you can attack that for sure.
I love that. Do you have a success story that you've seen, maybe of launching a technology and changing someone's life or improving quality of life? Do you have a success story you would want to share?
Oh, where do I start? So, whenever I think of like this industry and where technology can really play a significant role, I'm brought back to my Eversound days, right? Where we worked very closely, Josh, and basically I had mentioned before, it was like that wireless headphone system that helped people to hear clearer. And I think back to a specific story where someone was using it for their loved one who was in the later stage of their Alzheimer journey, was thought to be nonverbal, like non-communicative, right? And through our system, they were able to play music and talk over the music, and they were able to have a conversation with their loved one again. And I just try to place myself in that family member's shoes, right? Like this is the matriarch or patriarch of your family. You're seeing the slow decline. You're thought that you're never able to have a conversation again, and then you're able to use this tool and hear your loved one say, "I love you." Like I don't think there's any better feeling than something like that.
And that was so long ago, and I remember pieces of that study too. Is just seeing when they put their headphones on and could block the world out and focus. You just saw people come back, like they could actually. It was such a way to get people re-engaged, and that was like 10 years ago. So like technology has come so far now. Like I just read an article on cochlear implants and trying to mitigate dementia symptoms by helping people improve hearing, and I thought that was really fascinating. So, Matt, research in the literature shows that if you can improve hearing, you can have less dementia symptoms. And I know that from our original study, we saw a lot of this stuff come to fruition. But can you walk us through how technology might be able to maybe help improve hearing or sight? How can we use tech to actually improve that, to improve quality of life for those with cognitive decline?
Absolutely. So when I think about the hearing loss component, I spent, 10 years of my career like really dedicated to this. So what the numbers say is that 80% of people over the age of 85 have some sort of hearing loss. About 1 in 5 that could benefit from a hearing aid are actually using one on a consistent basis, right? So there's this big gap of like 60 to 65% of people that could use a hearing aid that are just not. And I like to think of it as a silent epidemic, pun intended. And I'm surprised more people aren't necessarily talking about it or trying to create solutions for that, because hearing loss is one of those things. Like if you've got mild to severe hearing loss, you're 3 to 5 times more likely to develop dementia. I've even seen situations in some of the communities we've worked with. They thought someone was further along their dementia journey, but then they tried something like Eversound or got hearing aids and realized, like, yes, they were living with dementia, but it was more so the hearing loss. And that's why they weren't engaging with the world around them. So when I look at technology, right, like I do think there's some really cool things coming out with like the AirPods and how you can like use those as essentially hearing aids now tied into your iPhone. But I do think technology is just making some of those things that were thought to be, you know, some of those negative things that we're experiencing in our lives to make it that much easier and allow us to re-engage with the world around us. And I think technology helps to kind of help to create that bridge that might have not been there. And I do, if you look at hearing aids, right, like, and especially with some of the over-the-counter stuff that was passed, I do think more people will have access to them. And I think once we kind of get over the stigma around it, right, and start embracing technology to improve that quality of life, we'll start to see those outcomes come to fruition of what we want it to be.
And it's amazing because once you improve the ability to hear, it improves socialization. Thus, then at the dining room table, they can focus more. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and it's not a huge investment either. The one thing I do see is that people with dementia often forget their hearing aids, but I've even seen reminders now that their alarm clock reminds them to put in their hearing aids. So, Matt, within your new role, I'm sure that you work with organizations and you see hiccups or challenges. Could you walk us through some of the hiccups that you've seen and kind of where that's led to?
Yeah, so my eyes have been made wide open. You know, I've come from this resident tech engagement side of things to now kind of seeing this entire technology IT picture, and it's really interesting when we go into these communities and see people, you know, even in the same days, just really on different sides of the technology spectrum, right? Like I go back to this story of where we walked into a CCRC or life planning community, whatever they're going by nowadays. And they had different levels of care naturally. And at the end of each week, their IL would print out 200 pages of information of residents that might be moving into AL. They would then give those documents to the AL team, and they then had to do data entry of all that stuff. And when, like technology, right? Like just syncing those so the technology or the information flows from one to the other saved so much time from the data entry side. And then, you know, the printing costs alone, it was just pretty amazing to see like what that disconnect was. And then another example too I saw was when this company embraced this, you know, if someone needed a maintenance order, they could put in a maintenance order and would go to the maintenance team. But this, I guess, weren't onboarded right or didn't really fully understand. So what it would do is the ticket from the resident would go to the front desk. The front desk would then manually write out the ticket and then walk down the hall and give that to the maintenance team. And it's just like, no, just sync the resident ticket to the maintenance team, cut out the person at the front desk. And like, you know, so I do think there's this, and so it kind of all sums up to like this idea of like these business systems, and sometimes it lacks a clear owner that's set to really just try to like optimize and making sure that it's doing what the original goal was. Because too many times, you know, the CEO meets someone at a conference, loves the idea, passes it down without that clear vision, and it's kind of like this big gap of like trying to use the system versus actually using it, right? And like, what are we trying to do to make sure that they're fully optimizing what they're spending a lot of money on? So it's like, how can we help to fine tune this over time to making sure that people are being smart about their money? Because technology spending is only going to get more as we continue on. And so making sure that we're smart while doing it, and then optimizing while we're doing that as well.
I love that. How do you measure a return on an investment with technology?
That is a great question. So when I look at technology, I think there's a couple of different aspects to that. You know, I think ROI as a, you know, a general term, you define it by two different ways, right? If it's going to save you time or is it going to save you money? And where I look at from the employee optimization, right? I do think technology can play a significant role in cutting amount the time it takes to do X, Y, or Z that people need to do on a, you know, weekly, daily basis. I look at technology in my own journey where I used to have a podcast. It would take me like 4 to 5 hours to edit the full thing. Now using a technology platform that it's now down to like 30 minutes to really do that, right? So there's a clear ROI there. And then when I think of like the money spent, right? Like, you're only going to be spending more with it. So making sure you're being intentional of where you are spending it. And then I'm continuing to see people talk about, and it's interesting, talking about their Wi-Fi and their new builds as an amenity or like a selling point for residents to potentially move into it. And I would say too, we technically see like technology spend about 3%, anywhere from 2 to 3% of the total operating budget for that year. But we have seen it start to tick up so people can kind of invest in this infrastructure and making sure they're building a foundation that's scalable for the future. And again, I think it's inevitable for every community's journey. The ones that are embracing it will be the ones that continue on, and the ones that are putting it on the back burner, kind of doing the bare minimum, are going to be the ones that aren't necessarily speaking to these residents that are coming, or if not already here.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we also miss out on too is the return on investment of quality of life. Like
Yeah, that's a good
when we
point.
first did Eversound, seeing people's quality of life come through. So yes, there's a cost associated with it, but also from a programmatic or a marketing perspective, looking at return on investment differently too as well. That I don't
Yeah.
always think we think that way through. How do you feel about, or what have you heard from residents that are experiencing technology? Are they wanting more of it? Are you finding that assisted livings that residents are being part of that technology landscape?
So it's interesting because in some communities I talk to, it's almost the residents are more technology curious than some of the staff members. I just talked to a group last week that they had some Japanese scrolls, and I'll shout out Meadows here with Colleen Ryan from there, where they got these Japanese scrolls and they put it in their lobby, and no one knew what they said, and the residents were like, "I'm just going to take a picture and put it in the Chat GPT." So they did that, and then were able to kind of get the information, basically that translation, almost right there. And I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, my residents don't want to learn about this stuff," but we're actually seeing the opposite. And I think the technology appetite is increasing. And just another quick example, but I think kind of speaks to this. One of our partner clients, did their annual resident survey. They did it 3 years ago. Ability to do it online or the ability to do it pen and paper. 3 years ago, 15% of people, 1.5, did it online. They just did the same survey this year. That number is now up to 45% of their
Wow.
residents now filling it out digitally, right? And it's a simple thing, but I do think more and more residents that are coming in it's not a nice to have anymore. It's a need to have, and more people are going to be using it to FaceTime their grandkids, use it for streaming services. And you got to make sure that you're building that infrastructure today to really support those residents today and tomorrow.
For sure. And I'm even seeing things like robots now that families can log in and drive around and see their loved ones at different times. Or from more of the clinical side, I'm seeing AI now start to enter into like medication reviews to see when it is to reorder. So it's getting really fast. My thing is, we just did a podcast the other day, and this was fascinating. It was about a light bulb. And when the light bulb was invented, part of the reason was to make us work longer. Do you think that technology will make us work longer? I know that it's to slow down so we can spend more time with residents, but do you think that it could be a possibility where technology comes in, now we have more time to do more stuff, so it's more and more like the workload doesn't actually shift, it just has more stuff to do? I'm just curious.
I would have to agree with that. I mean, I even look at my own life, right? We're like comparing that to, some of the jobs a couple decades ago, right? Like just the access to always be on, it's tough to turn off, right? Like coming home and, even though I work from home, I see it with my wife, right? She's got an office she goes into, but she brings her work laptop home and now is able to do that. I do think that there's going to be some things that shift, right? Like I look at finances and what that can look like versus, how do you automate the books and all that sort of stuff. So I do think there's going to be some more of these like meaningful tasks that people will do, but I think workload is only just going to become more and more, and you need to fight for your time and take off that time to practice that balance, that blend, whatever you want to call it, between that work and that life that you're practicing every single day.
In healthcare, it's tough, I think, the work-life balance. A lot of people have put a thing on it. I've seen photos of you and your family doing stuff on social media. And how do you balance with the speeding up of technology and being in the middle of it? How do you balance to be able to say, okay, like this is a lot. Now I'm going to take some time for myself. What are some things that you do for yourself?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, not being a co-founder of a company anymore has definitely helped with that. Kind of that anxiety of people's mortgages depending on you, not necessarily there. It's changed a little bit, of course, still helping with some of the stuff. But what I try and really practice, and I try and preach it to everybody on my team, right? Like, because I used to think burnout was a myth until I was burned out and didn't really experience that. And I used to pride myself in not taking vacations. But then when I went and did a week in Mexico and just felt like a completely different, more positive human being and coming with that. So I think there's a level of intentionality with that. I do think there's a level of blending with it as well. So, like a great example, I was just in Orlando for a week long Disney trip with my wife and our 4 year old daughter. On the tail end of it, I was giving a keynote to a senior living operator down there. So I was able to kind of mix the fun with the business and really just try to like over communicate that. And I think there's been times in my life where I did not over communicate that with my wife to only just, punt the potential issue down the way. But I find like over communicating and aligning on what success looks like as a dad, as a partner, and as an employee, and really trying to highlight what that can look like and identify what that success looks like to me, and making sure that I'm holding myself accountable to all of those.
Being a dad myself, Matt, as I've noticed, you incorporate being a dad into who you are, even as a professional. Where do you see technology when they get older? What do you see for your child? And do you see that in your mind too, as well as creating a future for them that's a brighter future? And what would that look like to you? Whether it's senior living at school, what does that look like to you as you're building this and knowing that your child will live through this technology change? What would you want it to look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really scared at times. Even just looking at some of the data around like social media and stuff, and like how that's impacting some of the teenagers today, right? Like, I don't think we've seen ever a higher rate of like anxiety and depression, because I think technology gives us this level of how do we're comparing ourselves to each other, and social media becomes such a highlight reel of people's lives. So I think to your point of like being a dad of my own stuff, I try to bring like a level of authenticity to it. And like I find at times people will put me on pedestals, but I think it's important to share those, my mental health journey of going back to therapy at times and sharing some of these things where I didn't have all of the answers. So in terms of like creating this, I do want to just bring a level of realism to this, right? Or just, I don't know if realism is the right word, of just being like real when it comes to a lot of this stuff. Because I think, you go on Instagram, some of these overly filtered things, and like comparison's the thief of joy, right? And I find myself, if I'm ever depressed, it's I'm looking at someone and wishing I had what they had. But when I take a step back and look at what I have, right, I have so much to be grateful for. So as I'm creating this level of technology, I do think there's a level of automation comes with it. I do think it's important as parents to help our kids develop those soft skills, right? And not just having a screen in front of them. So like, how are they handling conflict? How are they handling conversations? How are they creating relationships? So I do think, what we can do to help be better parents is almost this technology void at times, and making sure that they're developing as little humans and little people, and making sure that we're not having a over reliance on technology, but are using it on certain things to just be smarter in some things, but then also just being smarter when we're not using it as well.
What is something you would want to leave everybody with? Some words of wisdom or something that you would want to just leave everybody with?
Yeah, I think if there's words of wisdom to leave everyone with, would basically be around the idea, I come back to technology, right? I know there's a lot of people that are reluctant or scared about it, but, like going to the gym, right? Like, you can't just go one time and expect you to be totally in shape. It's a muscle you got to continue to flex. You got to continue to work out. You got to continue to fail. And if there's one thing that's been super beneficial to my own just mental health and my own career, it's changing the word fail and the word learn, right? I didn't fail at doing something. I just learned how not to do it. And as you are on your journey, whether it's in your personal or professional life, just embracing that. They say death and taxes are the two definites in your life. I would also add the word change. Embracing change, understanding change is going to come, and being okay with that. And how can you really just continue to adapt and adjust what you're doing, to not only better yourself but better those around you, and making sure that you're helping to level up those that you call friends, family, and loved ones.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, Matt, and pick your brain, connect, learn more about tech, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, I'm probably one of the easiest people to find, for better or worse. They can definitely just connect with me on LinkedIn, which would just be, Matt Reiners, which I'm sure it's in the title at some degree, so you can find me there. Or they can just email me at matt@theseniorlivingconnector.com.
Anything else, Matt, that you want to make sure that's in there?
I just want to thank you, Dr. Josh. Just want to say, like, you're a bright light in this industry, and just, and I mentioned it at the beginning that you just welcomed me with open arms, and I still remember the passion and the enthusiasm, and you really just, if anything, inspired me early on in my own entrepreneurial journey to know that something was there. And so just want to thank you. I would not be the person I am today with some of the, accolades and helping hundreds of thousands of people without your initial belief. So without you, there is no me. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt, so much for joining me. I so appreciate it. And I want to say thank you, everybody, for listening. Once again, my name is Josh. This is Nide Talks. We hope that you subscribe and then also keep following us for more information. Matt, thank you so much for bringing technology, inspiring us, and making this whole industry a little bit better.
Thank you.